Hello, my name is Monica Irvine, and I'm with the Etiquette Factory. I am really sad that we cannot be live face to face when I'm giving this workshop, but I'm going to do my best to give you the same energy and same spirit that this workshop is taught when I'm there in person. This is one of my favorite workshops to teach. It's called Disciplining Our Children with Love so that we don't break their spirits. This is a powerful workshop. It's a tender workshop. I'm going to warn you in advance. It's one of those workshops that I get a lot of parents that leave this workshop feeling sometimes like there's work to be done at home, which isn't there always. Before I begin, let me just say this, parents. You know, it was our Father in Heaven's perfect plan that His imperfect children raise His imperfect children. And that's His plan. And somehow it works. You know, He knew that you and I would make mistakes along this journey of parenting. I've made plenty of mistakes. But He knew that the best way for you and I to become more like our Savior, and for our children too to become more like our Savior, is for us to grow and learn together in families. And that's what this is about. This is about how do we help our families become more united, to have more love in our home. And I'm excited to share with you these thoughts. So let's get started. So, what is love? I know if I were to just ask that question, I probably would get 1,000 answers. But I'm going to give you one of my definitions for love. The definition that I use is love is to care for others in a way that shows an undeniable concern for their happiness and well-being. Well, here's the question. When you are in the act of disciplining your children, do they feel that love from you? Do they sit there and think, gosh, Mom and Dad love me so much while we're disciplining our children? If not, maybe there's something we could do a little differently, because I know that there is a way for our children to feel how much we love them in the act of discipline. Would you agree that discipline is an act of love? I mean, isn't that why we do it, right? We do it because we love our kids. We want to teach them right from wrong. We know that the more often they make correct choices, the more happiness that they'll have in their life. And that's why we discipline, to teach, to correct. The Bible tells us that we should do that. But we, thank goodness, have this perfect example of Jesus Christ, who showed us in His life how to love others, how to treat others. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So before we talk about the good things, I'm going to have to talk about the bad things. And you all, this list of things that I personally believe can hurt your child's spirit is kind of a long list, but let me just go through it one at a time. And really, if we each just kind of think about these and go, is there a chance that I could improve in this one area? Then we're going to count this workshop as successful. You may want to take notes. I will show you at the end of this workshop a link where you can download the slides that I'm sharing with you, along with some specific notes that go along with each slide. So if you want to just sit and relax and listen, you can do that too. So what are some things that I think can hurt our kids? Well, number one, we want to be careful. Oops, let me see if it's going to show two at one time. That's okay. We want to make sure that we don't define our children by their behavior. What I mean by this is we would never say to our child, you are dishonest, or you are so selfish. Now, is there a chance that our child made a selfish decision or made a dishonest choice? Sure. And so we could say, honey, that was dishonest. That was a dishonest choice that you made. But we don't want to say you are dishonest. Because the thing is, that's not who our kids are. That's not who we are. We are not a sum of our mistakes. At least I hope not. And your children, nor do we want other people to define us by our mistakes, because we're so much more than that. We're more than the things that we do wrong. And we want to be remembered for the good things that we do and not just the negative and bad things that we do. And so our wording makes a difference. Who our children really are these amazing sons and daughters of God, created in His image, who have divine potential, incredible potential. That's who our children really are. And we want our children to know what their potential is. Because when kids believe in themselves and know that their parents believe in their goodness, then that's what helps them to aspire to be good and better with the Lord's help. So be careful with how we word things like that. Now, number 2, take a look at this picture on the screen. Do we ever feel like this? Do we have days where we're just like, oh, you may be having a day like that today? But the thing is we've got to be careful that we don't cause our children to feel like just being with them and their behavior is exasperating us. So I run these manners camps in the summer, and a couple of years ago, I had this little boy in my camp. His name was Reagan. And he was a cute little, I think he was 6 or 7 years old. Anyway, he was in my camp, and I don't remember exactly what led to this conversation because we talk about a lot of things. But during this conversation, Reagan raised his hand and he said, Mrs. Irvine, I think my mom is happier when I'm not there. And my heart did what your heart just did. Oh. And, the thing is that I spent 4 days with Reagan. And by the end of that 4th day, I had a feeling why his mother was so exasperated. You all, Reagan was a tough kid. He was hard. And I'm pretty good with kids, but he made it difficult that week. And so my judgment that I might have been tempted to judge that mother when Reagan first said that quickly turned to compassion after I spent some time with him. But the thing is, because I knew Reagan felt that way, every time that he would misbehave, which was kind of often in camp, I would look Reagan in the eye and I'd say, Reagan, look at me. Look at Mrs. Irvine. He would look at me. I'd say, Reagan, you are so good. I know you can make good choices, and I need you to show me what good choices looks like. Now show me how you can listen, Reagan. Yes, ma'am. Okay, I'm going to listen. And he would listen for about 60 seconds, and then I'd be having that conversation again. Parents, it's difficult, but do our kids ever hear us say, could you just go? Could you just go in the other room, please? Could you just go to your room? I don't want to see you right now. We've got to be careful, because here's the thing. Do you ever feel like God says that to you? I mean, you and I continue to make mistakes. We continue to sin day after day. If you're like me, I've been praying for forgiveness for the same kind of sins pretty much my whole life, because I tend to repeat the same sins. Like I have weaknesses, and I tend to get stuck in the same traps time after time. And there I go to God again in prayer for the same thing. But you all, I have never once ever felt God say, Monica, could you just go away? I don't want to look at you right now. I've never felt that from him. Parents, you and I are supposed to be a representative of God's love for our children. We're the closest thing that they can relate to what unconditional love feels like. Children who don't feel that in their home from their parents struggle to understand what it could possibly feel like to be loved unconditionally by their Father in heaven. We have to represent that, and we're not going to be perfect at it, but parents, we can try. We can try and do our best to show them what unconditional love feels like, and it does not feel like sending them away when they make a mistake. And we're going to talk about better ways to do that. So another thing that we want to be so careful with is our tone of voice. You know what I'm talking about. You know what I mean. A tone can be deadly and can leave lasting scars. When our kids hear us say, "Really? You just did that. I cannot believe you just did that." Do you know what our kids hear us say? They hear us say, "How could you be so stupid? What were you thinking?" Parents, they weren't thinking. Just like you and I aren't thinking when we make our mistakes, or we decide to ignore the prompting from the Spirit who's trying to get us to not make that choice, but we make it anyway. Our tone can be so dangerous. We don't want to send a message to our children that we think they're not capable of making better choices. We're going to hold them accountable. We're going to talk about that. But the way that we speak to our children, parents, it matters. I don't understand why some parents believe that they have a special license to speak to their children in a way that they would never and never do speak to any other person on this earth except their children. But they think because they're the parent, they can yell and scream and condescend and speak to their child in a way that if they knew other people were listening, they would be ashamed. We cannot get respect and honor from our children if we're not giving them respect and honor. It just doesn't work that way. Parents, as a mother of 3 boys who have now left home, you're going to miss it. You're going to miss your kids being home. You're going to miss having your family at the dinner table. You're going to live for when they call you and when they come by to visit you. I know that there are many of you listening who don't have a good relationship with your parents right now. And it didn't start when you were an adult, did it? No. It started when you were a kid. And you developed a level of respect or lack of respect with your parents as a child. And that carries over into your adult life. Some of you go and visit your parents at Christmas, not because you really want to, but because you feel obligated to. You don't want that, parents. You want your kids coming home because they want to be home. You want them to come see you because they want to come see you. And that only happens when we have a relationship with our kids that is mutually respectful and mutually loving. The kind of relationship that you have with your 3-year-old is going to look like your relationship with your child when they're 13. And that's going to look like your relationship with your child when they're 33. You all, it will. Now, it's not too late to change that, but I want you to know it will. Let's keep going. If we expect control, like if we expect our children to exhibit self-control when they're upset, when they're angry, well, we have to show them what that means, what that looks like. You know, I assume, don't want our kids screaming at each other when they do something to each other that's not so nice, or accidentally step on their sibling's Lego set and break it. We don't want our kids going screaming, saying, "How could you do that? Stop," or, "I hate you." We don't want our kids doing that. But what do they see us do when we're angry? Or when someone does something that might cause us to be angry? For instance, when someone cuts in front of you when you're driving, what do your kids hear you do? Do they hear you remain in control and speak about other human beings kindly, with respect? Or do they hear you lash out in anger at others? We've got to be careful that we're a living example of what it means to remain in control even when other people wrong us. A quote that I read once, I'm not sure who the author is of it, says, "The way we talk to our children becomes their inner voice." I know you know that's true, because many of you replay in your brain what your parents said to you. And some of you fight against those words that you heard your parents say to you. Parents, your voice, it does become their inner voice. It becomes the voice that they replay in their mind, the words that you say. So what words are your children replaying in their mind today? We're going to keep going. We're not quite done with that list. Something else we want to be careful with is humiliation. I had a dad once stand up in one of my workshops and he said, "Mrs. Irvine, I disagree. I think humiliation works. I mean, if I want my kids to stop doing something, if I humiliate them, they will stop." And I said, "Sir, I agree with that. Your kids probably will stop. But what's your goal? Is your goal to get them to stop that behavior immediately? Or is your goal to change their hearts, to make them want to obey, to want to please you and to please God?" Because there's a difference. And I said, "I can tell you this, sir. I can promise you that if you continue to humiliate your children as a form of discipline, you will lose your children. You will. Over time, you will lose them." Condemnation is another thing we have to be really careful with. What do I mean by condemnation? Well, I mean overreacting. I mean treating our children like they have committed the unpardonable sin when they've made a mistake. I know that all of you are aware of how many young people are walking away from the church today. I see a lot of good Christian kids who are turning their backs on their faith. And I believe one of the reasons that that is happening is because of condemnation. I believe that when we raise children in a Christian home and we're constantly teaching them values and teaching them what to do, I think we don't spend enough time talking about what they should do when they do mess up, when they do make a mistake, because they will. Just like we do. Because we hold them to such a high standard that when they do make a more serious mistake, possibly in their teen years, that they feel so condemned, they feel so ashamed, that instead of confronting that sin with repentance and confession, They would rather slide away into the dark, and they start distancing themselves from their parents, from their clergy leaders, and people that they trust because they're so ashamed of their mistakes. Parents, we've got to be careful. We've got to be careful that we don't condemn our children when they make a mistake. Let me give you a personal example. So, I've got these 3 boys, and we taught them. We wanted for our kids what you want for your kids. We wanted them to remain morally clean, to remain chaste before their marriage. We knew that if they made those kind of decisions, it would lead them to greater happiness and would prevent them from sorrow, more sorrow. And so we had lots of rules, and we taught lots of things. And from the time they were born, I'm teaching them why it's important to remain chaste. And because of that, we taught them that it wasn't really necessary for them to hold hands, to kiss, to hug before they were old enough to get married. In fact, it wasn't just not necessary. We told them why it was so dangerous. We didn't allow our children to have a committed relationship with someone until they were old enough to get married. So that meant there was no such thing as a girlfriend until they were out of high school. Well, I taught them this concept by teaching it like this. I'd say, because you're not allowed to be in a committed relationship, let's talk about physical affection. So if you were holding a girl's hand on Monday, and then on Friday, you're holding a different girl's hand, and the girl on Monday saw you holding the girl's hand on Friday, do you think the girl from Monday would be upset? And my boys would be, yes. Well, why would she be upset? Well, because she would think that if I was holding her hand, there was some level of commitment. No, maybe we weren't getting married tomorrow, but there was some kind of commitment. That's right. Because physical affection, even something as innocent as holding hands, shows a certain level of commitment. And since you're not allowed to be in a committed relationship until you're married or until you're old enough to get married, that means that you really shouldn't be holding hands, hugging, and for sure kissing. Now, we taught that principle, you all. I did. I taught that a lot. Fast forward, our youngest son is 16. And there was this little girl that he was very fond of. And we knew about this fondness between them. They were pretty fond on each other, and she went to church with us. Well, thank goodness her parents felt the same way as we did and taught the same principles. But one of the problems was my son was also really good friends with her brothers. She had 2 brothers about my son's age, and so they spent a lot of time together. Well, one day, he had been over at their house and had been on an outing with their family. And he comes home and he says, "Hey, Mom, I need to tell you something." And I'm like, "Okay, what?" He said, "Well, me and so-and-so, Mom, we kissed today." Now, parents, on the inside, I'm going to tell you, my heart sank. He was 16. I knew the danger that he was in. But I didn't want to condemn him. I didn't want to overreact because I knew that is never the answer. And that shuts down conversation. And that's what I didn't want. And so I asked him about it. We talked about it. He told me about how it happened. I asked him about how he felt. He told me he thought it was awesome, which, wasn't a surprising response, but wasn't the response I was hoping for. Long story short, in this conversation, I just reminded him, I tried to gently remind him of the danger that he was in. And I told him I understood why it felt good. It's supposed to feel good. But that usually, it's not usually, but it's dangerous to be involved in those kind of physical acts until we're closer to marriage, because it can lead to danger. And so I just reminded our son of those things, which he just said, "Oh, Mom, listen, it just happened one time. It's not going to happen again. It just was an accident. Mom, trust me, I know where the line is." Well, I knew he was in trouble. 2 weeks go by. Here comes this same son. "Hey, Mom, I need to tell you something." "Okay." "Well, me and so, we did kiss again, Mom." I'm like, "Son, what happened to the rule that you're not supposed to be in a room alone with a girl?" "Mom, we weren't actually in a room. We were actually on her staircase, which isn't really a room." So parents, you know that I knew my son was in more trouble. So once again, we talked about it. We talked about his plan. We talked about his goals. We talked about why it was dangerous to be involved in physical affection at his age. And I expressed my expectations for him and God's expectations for him. And we ended that conversation with my son reassuring me once again that I had nothing to worry about. Fast forward a couple of more weeks. Here comes this child. "Mom, Dad, I need to tell you something. I want you to know that me and so are not going to kiss anymore. And in fact, we're not going to even be around each other for a while until we make sure and know that we're strong enough not to do that anymore." And I'm like, "Well, so what's the change? Why have you all of a sudden decided this?" He said, "Well, Mom, you know how you told me that whenever I kissed a girl the first time, more than likely would be a quick little kiss, but that each time if I kissed her again, more than likely it would become more passionate?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, the thing is, Mom, tonight we kissed again, and it kind of scared me. And so we're not going to do that anymore." Parents, the fact is they didn't. They actually did separate for a time being. And that could have gone either way. But here's why I'm sharing with you this experience. Had I condemned this child the first time he came to me, he would have just not told me about the other experience. When we condemn and overreact, we actually stop conversation. And when we stop conversation between us and our children, well, then we don't have any more. It's more difficult for us to influence them. If they're not talking to us, how can we influence them? What I wanted more than anything in my relationship with my children is I wanted us to be able to talk about things. I wanted them to be able to share and not be afraid to tell me the truth. I didn't want my kids hiding things from me, because I knew what that was like, because I was a teenager that hid things from my parents, because I didn't trust their reaction. And I didn't want that for my child. I wanted them to be able to just express whatever it was, the good, the bad, the ugly. I wanted to know. Parents, you're not going to know if your kids don't trust you. And the way that they trust us is if we don't condemn and if we don't overreact. Another thing that we want to be careful with is comparing our kids to each other, to their siblings. Look, I know why you're tempted to do that. I know you walk over and you look at your son's room and then you look at your daughter's room and maybe you say to your daughter, "Honey, do you see how I can see your brother's floor? But do you see how I can't even see the color of your carpet?" I get why you want to do that, but parents, I'm going to encourage you not to do that. The thing is, as you know, our kids are born already with a certain level of, envy sometimes and a little competition between their siblings. And we just, as parents, we don't want to do anything to build that up, Because if we're not careful, it can build resentment up between our siblings for each other and even for us as a parent. I'm kind of shocked at how many adults tell me that their parent definitely had a favorite. And that just hurts my heart to think that any child would think that their parent loves another more than them or likes another more than them. So we've got to be really careful about comparing. Let's talk about fear for just a minute. Fear is related to condemnation, to overreacting, to the tone. But let me give you an example from my own childhood. You all, I had incredible parents. I had such a good mom and such a good dad. Really, just good people, good parents. But I will tell you that both of my parents were a little hot-tempered, a little hot-headed, were kind of loud and scary when they got mad. When I look back and think about discipline when I was a kid, it's kind of a scary feeling. Well, you know, I can use fear too. I can say, stop. I said put that down. And my child's going to stop and put it down. But just like the example I used about humiliation, what's our goal? Is our goal to get our child to stop behavior? Sometimes if our child is running out in front of a car, for sure, you're going to scream at the top of your lungs. But that's rare. That's when physical safety is at risk. And then we have to scare them to freeze. But outside of their physical safety, of physical harm, fear is a really poor way to inspire our children to want to be better. So I also had a grandmother. Her name is Grandma Madewell. And I spent a lot of time at her house growing up. Now, in my parents' defense, Grandma Madewell was just a more soft-spoken, quieter personality than my parents. But still, she was strict. She expected us to behave. I respected her so much. If we misbehaved at her house, if I did something wrong, she handled it in pretty much the same way. She would take me by the hand. I remember her walking me back to her bedroom and sitting me down on her bed and taking me by the hand and looking at me and saying, Monica, it hurts me to see you behave like that. You are much too kind. You are much too good to speak to your brother the way I just heard you speak. Parents, my grandmother made me feel like I was too kind and I was too good to misbehave. She made me want to be better because I wanted to be the little girl that I thought she thought I was. Because she just made me feel like she trusted that I could be better and do better. And my whole life, she was someone that it mattered to me what she thought of me, and I wanted to please her. That's what respect and discipline does for our children. Parents, I believe that the softer you speak, the more your children will listen. The greater respect they will have for you. And it's with that respect that you will be able to influence your children more. Be careful. Be careful that you do not use fear, which is yelling and screaming and threats of physical punishment. Be careful if those are the ways that you parent. And if that's how you feel, that's the best way you can get your children to listen, parents, there's something wrong. There's something broken in your relationship with your children. If that's how you feel is the only way to motivate your children, there's something broken. And we need to find what that is. We've already talked about overreacting. We're going to remain calm. Have in your mind this thought: am I a safe place for my children to land, to come to when they're in trouble? Can they trust me? We need to have more patience with our kids. You know, the thing is that we need to remember, parents, is it's hard to always make good choices. It's hard to always choose the right. I mean, I think so. I want to choose the right, but then I find sometimes I don't. And our kids are young. Parents, they have their entire life to try to figure out what's good. We figure out what's good through experience. You know, one time I have a child that kind of struggles with anger. He always has since he was born. I blame his father. But over the years, I have prayed the same prayer so many times. You know, Lord, help me to know how to help this child not get angry, to have more love for others, to be able to handle being disappointed and being wrong without, going from 1 to 100 in 5 seconds. Because you know why? I've worried that his anger would affect his relationships, his marriage, his relationships with his children, at work. And it's not that it is awful, but it's there, right? And I, as a parent, as you know, we really are in tune to our kids' weaknesses. It's one of the most painful things, I think, as a parent, is when we recognize that our child has a weakness, and then we want so badly to fix it, and we try to fix it, and we feel like we're on this timeline that we've got to fix every little thing that they do wrong before they turn 18, because we're going to send them out into the world, and we want to send them out into the world perfect human beings. But guess what? I know you know that no one's perfect, but do you really know it? Do you know it deep down and know that there are things you will not fix? In fact, we don't fix anything with our kids. You all, we don't. It's God that fixes things with our kids. We don't. Yes, we can influence them with God's help, but it's between our children and God who they become. It is. One time I was praying for this child. He was getting close to being 18, the one that struggles with a little anger. And I was praying the same prayer that I always pray. And I don't know why I never heard this before or never felt this before when I prayed. But for some reason on this day, as I was praying, I felt the Lord say to me in my heart, Monica, it's going to be years down the road before this child finally rids himself of this weakness. He's going to have many more life experiences. He's going to have other people come into his life that are going to shape him and mold him. And one day, he will shed this, but it's going to be a long time. For some reason, parents, when I heard, felt, however you want to describe it, I felt and heard those words in my mind, I all of a sudden felt relief. Even though, I didn't want my son to have this weakness going out into the world, but the fact is I realized that it wasn't up to me anymore. It wasn't my fault. It wasn't something I was doing wrong or that I needed to do more. You know, as parents, we put so much pressure on ourselves regarding how our kids turn out and their behavior. And it dawned on me that this wasn't about me. It was about him. And God knows him and knows what he needs, and he's already got it worked out. And I can continue to parent and continue to try to influence, but ultimately it's between my son and God. And that is comforting to know that it's not just up to me and it's not just up to you. So, we've talked about condescending. We're going to be very careful that we never speak in a condescending tone. And finally, the last one is we're going to try to have more understanding. Sometimes I think it's wise if we just look at our kids and say, you know what, kids? Look, I know it's hard to make good choices all the time. Your mother, I struggle too. But we're a family and we're in this together and we're here to support each other and to help each other become more like Christ. And I love you. There's nothing that you can do. There's no mistake you can make. No mistake you could ever make to change the way I feel about you. And there's no mistake, no matter how big, you can ever make to change the way God feels about you. One time I felt prompted to say to one of my sons when he was an older teen, "Son, I know you know the law of chastity and what it means, but I want to tell you that if you ever break that law," Mom, I'm not going to break that, son. "If you ever break that law, I want to remind you that there is no one on this earth who would rather walk through the path of repentance with you more than your father and I. Don't you ever be afraid to tell us, no matter what your mistake, we are here to help you." Now, parents, that child, as far as I know, never made that mistake. I don't know why I was prompted to say that to him. Maybe he just needed to hear it. I think our kids need to hear more often what to do if they make a mistake and that we will be here for them. And so that relationship that we're developing with our kids is a relationship of trust, of mutual respect and honor. And so we have to stay away from this list of behaviors that I think harms that relationship with our children. So let's talk about some good things. One thing that we can do, and I'm just going to throw these up here. Whoops, let me go. Sorry, y'all. Me and my skills of PowerPoints. I'm just going to throw these up here. One thing that we want to be careful with is we have to hold our kids accountable. But the way that we hold them accountable can be respectful and loving. I believe that allowing our children to slide by without holding them accountable when we know and they know they've done something wrong. For instance, what if you give your teenager a 10 o'clock curfew and they come in at 10:10 and all you do is go, "You know you're 10 minutes late. Oh yeah, I know, Mom, sorry." But then there's no accountability. There's no consequence. I don't believe that helps our children. I believe when we let our kids kind of slide by that it actually contributes to lowering their self-esteem. Because when you and I do something that we know is wrong, we feel bad about ourselves. But when we apologize, when we make restitution, when we've paid the price, when we've asked for forgiveness from God, we feel that that's taken from us. But if we just dismiss it and never address it and don't try to make restitution and be held accountable for it, then it just sits there like in the pit of our stomach, this past behavior that was never rectified. And so parents, we need to realize it doesn't help our children to not hold them accountable. It creates an atmosphere of feeling unworthy. What we need to realize that when our children have done something wrong and it's never rectified, it can become a snowball effect where our kids go, well, I already did that wrong and I already did that wrong. I'm already a bad person, so what does it matter if I do this or that? We always want our children to feel the power of forgiveness, because that's when we can feel clean. It motivates us to want to make better choices. But when we feel dirty inside and bad inside, I believe it perpetuates further bad choices because of a self-loathing kind of thought process. So we really want to help our children to rectify bad choices, and the way we do that is to hold them accountable. So let me give you an example. So what can we do? I've learned in my parenting experience that I have mainly 3 or 4 things I'm responsible for. Number 1, I teach my kids what is expected by me and their father and by God. And then I give great confidence. I'm their biggest cheerleader in helping them to feel like they can do it and that I know that they can achieve with the Lord's help. That's why we call upon God every day to give us the strength and the faith to do our best to make good choices. So my job and my husband's job is to make sure our kids know what's expected of them. Then number 2, it's my job to make sure my kids understand the consequences for not meeting those expectations. That way they can make an informed decision. Because number 3 is I've got to back up and let my kids make choices. I don't like when parents continually dangle this carrot of discipline. Or like, if you don't do this, remember this is going to happen. Remember, if you don't take the trash out, this is what's going to happen. If the only way we can motivate our kids to do good is by dangling and reminding them of consequences, something's wrong. Something's not working. But I'm going to tell them the consequences like maybe once. And then I'm going to not remind them anymore about consequences because my kids are smart. They know. And here's the thing. If my kids forget, well, what that tells me is they didn't make what their mother or father said a priority. And that's their problem, not mine. So we're going to teach our kids what we expect. We're going to make sure they understand the consequences of not meeting those expectations. And then we're going to get out of their way and let them make choices, because that's how you practice being a grown-up. That's how you practice being a human being, is you got to make choices. And then the hardest part for you and me as parents is we got to be consistent. We got to do what we said we were going to do. And this is so hard sometimes. If you told your child that if they, disobey and don't meet their expectations of their chores this week, and then they did forget to take the trash out, and you had told them that their consequence was going to be that they had to clean all the bathrooms the next week, well, guess what? They've got to clean the bathrooms next week. And so our children have got to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that if mom or dad say something, they mean it. And it's going to happen 100% of the time. Parents, that's when you're going to get to quit giving consequences. When our kids are smart, they like to roll the dice. If they know that mom and dad don't always do what they say they're going to do, sometimes they mentioned a consequence, but then they forget about it, then your kids are going to just roll the dice and take their chances. Well, she may just fuss a little bit, but that's all. Or she might forget that she said I couldn't do this. And so then they kind of play the game. But once they know that every single time it's going to be met with a negative consequence, most kids are not dumb. And they're going to not want that negative consequence. So we've got to get out of their way. Now, I know, I don't know why my PowerPoint keeps throwing up 2 at a time. I'm sorry about that. But I know you probably would love for me to give you a whole list of consequences and tell you if your child does this, this is an appropriate consequence. Parents, I can't do that. The reason I can't do that is because I don't know your kids. But you do, and God does. Every child is different, as you know. What works for one will not work for another. But I can give you a list of some consequences that we did use in our home. I found that the most effective form of consequence was just parental disappointment and kind discussion. Now, it doesn't mean I go around saying to my kids, I am so disappointed in you, because I've got to be careful about that fine line about condemnation. But most often, once my kids hit 6 or 7 years old, the main consequence was conversation. It really was. Where I would go to my son and go, honey, could you help me to understand why you made that choice? Do you feel validated in that choice? How do you feel about it? If you had to do it all over again, would you do it differently? Let's talk about how your choice stacks up against the commandments. Or let's talk about how your choice relates to this parable in the scriptures. I just would try to teach them. And sometimes parents, sometimes I'd have a child that made a bad choice, but they were too prideful to admit that it was a wrong choice. And was that disappointing? Sure, it was. But I get parents that force their kids to apologize when their kids aren't really sorry, which does nothing. Do I want my kids to feel sorrow for their bad choices? Of course I do. Do I want them to say they're sorry? Of course I do. But I can't force that. You can't either. I mean, you can, but you're not going to help anything. And so sometimes I had to just leave it to the Lord. I would point out, we would discuss where the choice didn't match up with our commandments. I would talk about maybe my disappointment. I would invite my child to repent or invite my child to apologize or to consider apologizing. But then I had to leave it up to my child. Parents, I think that is the most effective approach. You know, just like I do, that when people try to force their beliefs on us or force their opinions on us, even if it's our parents, we tend to resent it. And a lot of times we tend to go in the opposite direction. And that's not what we want. We're trying to shape our children's hearts. We're trying to guide them and steer them in a direction that points to God. But that steering takes gentle steering, in my opinion. I think it's the most effective way. So, sure, did I ever withhold privileges? You bet I did. One of my favorite things was extra responsibilities. I remember one time me and my husband were thinking about one son that we wanted to give a consequence to, and we were going, how can we make him suffer? Nope, that's not enough suffering. Think more suffering. And we were. And we ended up making him paint the fence. I think that was the second year, actually. But because painting our backyard fence was a 2-week job, I mean, we're talking there's a lot of suffering there. But yeah, did that ever happen? Sure it did. But not often. Because we didn't have to a lot. But sure, I think our kids need to do hard things. And I think consequences need to sting. Now, I'm not talking physically. I'm really not. But I think it has to hurt a little bit. And so sometimes I would think, well, what does my child value doing more than anything else? And for sure, that's a consequence I might snatch up. So we really have to measure exactly what's effective. I think there always has to be a place of restitution where, sometimes I think parents drag out punishment and consequences just way too long, which then tends to build up resentment for our child towards us. There has to be a time period where the penalty has been paid. We're going to wash the slate clean and restitution has been made, and then we're all going to move on. We're not going to continually bring it up. We're not going to continually remind our child of their mistakes. You and I hate that too. I mean, I've got mistakes in my past that I just want them to stay in the past. And I'm not the same person I was when I made that mistake. And so we've got to be careful that we don't hold our kids in the past. Because if someone feels like they're never able to move past something and move on, that's also a dangerous place to be. Because then you just give up trying. And so we have to have a place where we go, it's done. Restitution has been made, and today's a new day, and we're moving on. And that's an important healing part. Even though our trust might have been hurt, we know that we've got to move forward. Okay, you all, let me just give a couple more things. We're almost done. I think it's impossible to parent successfully without prayer. Anytime that I noticed a child was missing a character trait, I would go to the Lord and seek His guidance as to what I could do to help my child learn that character trait. I also used prayer continuously as I parented. I know what it means to have a prayer, to pray all the day long, because I feel like I really do, especially in parenting. Constantly, I would have silent prayers in my mind. Lord, please help me. Please help me to know what to say. Oh, Lord, thank you so much for that tender mercy. I'll share an experience with you about prayer, and then we'll end. One time, my son Sawyer, he's my youngest, he and I, somehow, he was a teenager, 17 years old, and I don't remember what it was about, but we had a disagreement over the telephone earlier in the day. And when I got home later that day, about 5 o'clock, I went up to his room to discuss this disagreement, and apparently we were pretty upset with each other. Or at least he was really upset with me. Because I went into his room, and I remember looking down, and Sawyer was sitting on his beanbag that he had in his floor. And when he looked up and saw me, you all, the way that he looked at me was just, it's something that I'll always remember, because I had never seen my son look at me before with such anger in his eyes. And it kind of startled me. It kind of took me back a little bit. And I sat down on the end of his bed and I said, Sawyer, I want to talk about this. Let's talk about what happened and this disagreement. And Sawyer just stared at me without saying a word. He would not respond to my questions. I tried several times asking him questions and he just refused to speak, but just stared at me. And parents, I started panicking. Like, I didn't know what to do. The kid is 17. It's not like I can bend him over my knee. And so quickly I said a silent prayer and I just said, God, please help me to know what to do or to say, because I don't know what to do here. And I felt this impression, Monica, leave. But I didn't want to leave. I was like, oh no, we're going to talk about this. So here I am with my disobedient child, and there I am, a disobedient daughter to God, not doing what He had prompted me to do. So I try a couple more times to engage my son in a conversation which he refused to engage in. He just stared at me with darts shooting at me through his eyes. So finally I said I really was panicking, and I said another prayer. God, please help me. And beyond a shadow of a doubt, I felt, Monica, leave. Get up and leave. It was so strong. I knew God was wanting me to leave. So I did. I just stood up and walked out. The second I crossed his threshold of his bedroom door, here came the tears. Because we don't like it when our kids are upset with us. And I went into my room downstairs, and I got on my knees and prayed. And I said, God, I don't understand. Why did I need to leave? I want to work this out. And kind of the overarching feeling I got was just because he's too mad. Because you're not going to have a good conversation right now. You need to let him sleep. You need to let a little more time go by. And tomorrow you can talk about it. That was so hard for me, you all. My husband got home. I told him what happened. He was ready to kill Sawyer. But finally we did what we felt the Lord wanted us to do. The next morning I got up. I was in the kitchen preparing breakfast, and I heard Sawyer get up, and I heard him walking down the stairs. And truthfully, you all, I was a little nervous. It was a weird feeling. But Sawyer came around the counter, and I looked up at him, and he just walked over to me and put his arms around me and said, Mom, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Parents, you can try to parent without prayer. You will kick against the pricks if you do. God knows our children much more than we do. He knows them. He loves them. Let him help you parent. We're out of time, so I'm going to throw these up there. I've already really talked about all of these things. Parents, I get a lot of parents at the end of this workshop that say, Monica, what do I do? I'm guilty of many of the things that you've talked about. I had a dad once say, I am guilty of every single thing you've talked about today. My kids are teenagers. Is it too late? What do I do? Parents, there's only one person that wants you to ever believe it's too late to make changes, and it's not God. God is a healer of all things. All things are possible with God. So what do we do if we need to make changes, if we need to repent for how we've been parenting? Well, we need to start with a big dose of humility. And we need to go home and sit down in front of your children and say, hey kids, I need to repent. I need to apologize to you for the way I've been parenting you. I am sorry for whatever it is. And I'm going to commit to you today that I'm going to do everything I can to change and to not do that anymore. I'm going to be praying and asking God to help me. I would love it if you would pray too for me. And I am so sorry. Parents, one of the most beautiful gifts you can ever give your children is to teach them what repentance looks like when you repent to them. I know you can do this. And I know there is a better way to parent, and it's called love. Finally, show an increase in love after we discipline. That's the Lord's way. Okay, I'm going to leave you with just some resources, you all. This workshop that I've just taught you comes out of a really special book. That's a picture of it on the screen. It's called Raising a Generation of Ladies and Gentlemen. It is in our Parenting Essentials bundle, which looks like this on our website. It's a 52-week couple study. You can do it individually or with your spouse. It's a beautiful study. We just talked about one skill. This book has 52 skills in becoming a better parent for your children. I hope you look at that resource. I have a podcast. Every week I do a parenting class. It's called Parent Wise with Monica Irvine. You can find it on iTunes or other podcast platforms. Please, if you haven't done so, join my Facebook page, The Etiquette Factory with Monica Irvine, where we are constantly interacting and talking with our customers and giving valuable resources. Now, take a screenshot of this screen because this is where you can find the notes from this workshop. You go to theetiquettefactory.com/show notes and type in the password LOVE. And you can download the PowerPoint that I've just given you along with the notes from this workshop. My website is theetiquettefactory.com. Click on Shop Products and you will see the Parenting Essentials Bundle and other products where we help you teach your children how to be ladies and gentlemen. We do it through fun, interactive lessons. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. It's been an honor, and I hope to see you at a homeschool convention next year. Bye.